And good morning, and welcome to this iteration of the Tuesday, August 9th iteration of the Urban Planning Committee. I will now read the land acknowledgement. And normally we like to personalize it a little bit, but at this time I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, such as the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, as well as Métis and Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. And I personally relate to that. So with that in mind, I will start the roll call of committee members. And so I see Councillor Salvador. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I did see her pop up. Councillor Principe.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Councillor Hamilton is away. And so I will be chairing this meeting in her stead. We're also joined by a few other councillors today, and it's quite substantial, which is great. Councillor Stevenson, good morning.
Good morning.
Councillor Rice, good morning.
Good morning.
Councillor Wright, good morning.
Good morning.
Councillor Tang, good morning.
Good morning.
And I believe that is everyone that I can see. If I'm missing anyone, just let me know.
Good morning, Councillor
Councillor
Paquette. Sorry,
Rutherford.
haven't logged in yet.
Oh, good morning. Yeah. Good morning, Councillor Knack. For those not familiar
Councillor
with
Rutherford too is here.
Councillor Rutherford is also here. Good morning. That's great.
Morning.
Oh, did I miss one last person? I heard a small good morning. Good morning for you. All right. So as councillors join the meet, I probably won't be introducing you, just FYI. So let's move on. Would someone please move the adoption of today's agenda?
Happy to move the adoption of the agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. And I hope this has given everyone time to get their e-scribe up and running. Please vote on the adoption of the agenda.
In favor, Madam Clerk?
We have all the votes.
Please display the votes. And that is carried. Next, we will move to approval of the minutes.
And I'll move the approval of the minutes from the June 14th, 2022 Urban Planning Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. Please vote if there's no debate.
In favor?
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. So I was not made aware of any protocol items, but I'll just check in really quick. No, okay. And we'll now move to selecting items for debate. So the floor is now open. Nothing? All right. Well, we do have a speaker for item 7.2, so that should be selected. So I will select that. Councillor Salvador.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay, but I was going to select 7.1, 7.2 as well. So.
Oh, okay. You know what? Let's just correct the record and you can select both of them. Perfect. All right. There's been no report not selected, so there's no vote on proposed not selected for debate. So let's move on. As I mentioned, we do have a request to speak, and I'll just make that motion that Urban Planning Committee hear from the following speaker on item 7.2, and that would be Jason Wang, Paths for People. So if there's no debate on that, please vote.
Yes.
And
we have all the votes.
please display the vote. And that is carried. As far as I know, there was no request for anything time specific. I don't think we have to worry about that today. And I was not made aware of any councillor inquiries, but I'll just check in really quick to see if anything popped up. Nope. Okay, great. And we do have a request to reschedule reports. Do we have to do anything about that, Madam Clerk?
No, I believe
just-
because it was moved at ARC that it doesn't need to have a motion.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So,
Oh, sorry, just give me a minute, Mr. Chair.
sure.
No, yeah, no, we're okay. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you so much. And that takes care of the preliminary business. We'll now move to public reports. And I suppose we'll just begin in order if administration is ready on item 7.1. I'm not sure if you have a presentation.
We have a short opening remarks if you'd like.
Perfect. Yeah, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Kim Petrin, the branch manager of Development Services, and before you today is a report regarding options to further regulate the designated driver industry. With me today is Lila Peter, Director of Development Approvals and Inspection Section, and Nancy Jacobson from our Legal Services. I'll pass it over to Lila, who will walk us through the remainder of the introduction.
Good morning. The primary function of designated driver services is to transport a customer's privately owned vehicle, often with the customer as a passenger. Designated driver services support the city plan goals by contributing to Edmonton's safe, equitable, and inclusive transportation network, and by working to achieve a responsive mobility system in the city. At the March 7th, 2022 Community and Public Service Committee, administration presented options for industry regulations. At the time, there were 2 licensed designated driver services operating in the city, and as of today, there is 1. At that March committee meeting, administration recommended no change to the current practice, noting that the industry has demonstrated high levels of self-regulation. However, during that meeting, there was robust discussion regarding whether there should be requirements on businesses to obtain police information checks or require additional insurance. At the time, committee recommended that police information checks be required. Based on this past discussion and recommendation, administration is today recommending introducing a requirement for designated driver businesses to obtain police information checks and screen their designated drivers. This will help enhance public safety with the city's new mobility network, and the amendment will be brought forward in Q1 2023. Administration does not recommend pursuing additional mandatory requirements for provincial vehicle insurance. This is because the province sets out jurisdiction for private vehicle insurance and because the industry has a history of strong self-regulation. Administration will continue to monitor the industry and feedback from customers to ensure that regulations meet both industry and customer needs. And we will propose further regulations if warranted in the future. Thank you, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you for that. And so I will open the floor for questions. If you have any, go ahead and pop your name in. Going once, going twice. So here we go. Councillor Salvador, you selected the item, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Briquette. So just a few clarifying questions around the commercial general liability piece. So I guess if I had to boil it down, just give an example, what would happen if an employee was at fault and a vehicle that they were driving, someone's personal vehicle, was essentially totaled? What would happen in that instance if there was no commercial general liability versus the opposite if there was?
So just to clarify, Councillor Salvador, we're talking about the employee driving the client's
That's
personal
correct.
vehicle? Yeah. So in that situation, the client's personal insurance would take over any property damage or injuries that may occur to either the client themselves or to the driver. And over and above that, there's a process. If that person doesn't have insurance, then is a provincial process to deal with underinsured drivers. The commercial liability policy unlikely might step in. There may be a bizarre set of facts where it might come in multiple layers later, but it certainly would never be a primary insurance.
Okay. So if there was a requirement in place, it would be kind of a backstop to existing policies. Would it be redundant, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Redundant, I don't know if the word I would use. What it would do is cover other things that are unrelated to the auto insurance. Auto insurance is very strictly tied to who the owner of the vehicle is. A commercial general policy is more likely going to apply to things surrounding that, so outside of that vehicle type of insurance. So it's hard to say it's redundant. Could there be a very strange scenario where perhaps it does become a third or fourth coverage? Sure, insurance is complicated, but it's probably unlikely to really take a primary role in the auto space.
Councillor Salvador, if I might add, we're talking about a situation that is very unlikely to happen. It's a very, in terms of low probability, very, very low probability. So you're talking about a low probability situation, and then you're talking about a third or fourth mechanism on insurance.
Great, thank you for that clarity. I think that answers my question. I know colleagues have some questions as well, so I'll pass the floor.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry, just finishing up communication with the clerks. So we will now move to Councillor Principe.
Thank you,
Or
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Wright is Councillor Principe is actually on the committee.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had questionings along the same line about insurance. I might be mistaken, but I thought with insurance, the driver of the vehicle must be listed under the insurance as well?
No, there are provisions that allow occasional drivers with consent, so you could loan your car to a friend on a very occasional basis, and they would come under your insurance. A more regular user, yes, of course, absolutely.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. And because that helps me personally to understand that. Thank you. Also, dispatch. So how would, I know that dispatch isn't recommended, but does it give any more of any kind of safety, or what is the purpose of a dispatch center? Can someone answer that?
Do you mean of obtaining a dispatch license, or of a?
Well, is it do they have a dispatch? Well, I guess it's only one provider now.
Yeah, so
you wouldn't need a dispatch for one provider.
So a dispatch license is actually very similar to a business license, right? It's that license that governs the business operations in the vehicle for hire context of dispatching vehicles, in other contexts of performing some type of service. So it's probably easiest to think of it as it's that permission to operate your business.
Okay, so would the dispatch be for one provider, or would it be for multiple providers?
If we created a category, multiple providers could join, but each license would be issued to each individual business.
Oh, okay. Thanks for clarifying that too. But as I understand, we only have one provider now, correct? One. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, good. Those are my questions. Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Principe. Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this, I guess I want to understand, this originally came up at Community and Public Services. I think the motion was to come back to council, but it's now come back to urban planning. I just don't know why the switch up there.
So I don't have the exact details, but normally if there's an item coming forward and we want public speakers to be invited, they would come back to committee before it goes to council, and or it could have been a decision at ARC, but I don't have that specific history.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can see why it might not have come back to Community and Public Services, because that's a little more. We have a lot more things on that committee. Okay, so. Okay, so dispatch license is just sort of a specialized business permit, is that right? Is there?
It's a type of business license.
Okay.
That's a good way to think about it.
So does that create any sort of more red tape to have that specialized license as opposed to just a standard business license?
The complications and whether it becomes more red tape-like depends on if we add any more additional restrictions. So a general business license has very limited requirements to obtain, but certain categories require more things. So as we add more requirements to that license, it can be more complicated to obtain. So it's all dependent on the direction that we get of how many categories and requirements you want to put on that license.
So then the two requirements under option 3 would be the police information check and the insurance for the drivers. Is that too much?
That would be for committee to provide that direction. I think what we have heard in other municipalities that when there are more requirements, it can increase cost or time or confusion for businesses that are trying to establish themselves.
Okay. So the current sole provider of this service right now, this is something that they want to see come forward. And they have been self-regulating. But there's nothing to say that someone else coming into the market wouldn't follow those same regulations that are being self-regulated, right?
That's correct. They'd be required right now to have a business license. So a new designated driver company would, if they wanted to establish within the city, they would have to obtain a business license.
So shouldn't we level the playing field for all of those that may want to come into the market?
So that's the requirements now. The particular designated driver business that is operating in the city has chosen to have additional insurance parameters within their business operations. So they made a business decision to enhance their insurance.
Councillor Wright, I would say that the playing field is level right now. The rules are known, the rules of entry are known, and we've only just have one operator in the space who has chosen from a business decision point of view to have extra insurance for themselves.
And I would also add, that within the business license bylaw, we don't ask any other business to prove out their insurance. Every business does have, if they're a strong business operator, will insure themselves accordingly. And so we would expect that the business has insurance. It's just whether or not we're going to take a regulatory role of setting a limit and overseeing that.
Okay, but for the protection, I guess, of the drivers, the contracted drivers of this company, and for the protection, I think, of the patrons that use the service, isn't it better to have a higher level of insurance coverage?
I think that's a decision of council to make. Our recommendation has been no, because we're not here to tell a business how to operate. We're here to provide the right level of regulation for the risks associated with things that happen in our city. And when we look at risk, we look at things like probability of things happening. We want to make it easy for businesses in this space to operate as well, because we would like for people not to be driving when they're under the influence. And so if there were other providers, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, I heard a PSA on the radio driving in this morning saying that in Canada, on average, 3 people a day die from impaired driving. And so if we can encourage people to use these services, I think that's better protection for all Edmontonians. But I see that my time is up, and I'm not sure whether anybody's going to put forward a motion to maybe look at a different option or amend an option. I'll leave that up to committee.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Wright. I'm not seeing any other names on the list. I wasn't made aware of any particular motion, but there is a recommendation in the report. So I will open up to the floor if anyone wants to either move a motion or move the recommendation.
I will move the recommendation set out by administration.
Okay, do you mind reading that out?
Sure.
Or do you want me to? Do you have it in front of you?
I do,
There,
yes.
it's on the screen, so go ahead, please.
Okay. that administration prepare bylaw amendments to require designated driver service operators to obtain police information checks as outlined in option 1 of the August 9th, 2022 Urban Planning and Economy Report, UPE 00676.
Revised. Okay, great. Thank you very much. If there's no debate, please vote.
Can we add the date for it to return? Sorry,
Oh,
we were
right.
suggesting Q1 2023. Is that, do we need to add that in?
Sure, I'll add Q1 2023.
Thank you.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay. Do we need it on the screen or is it understood we can vote? Oh, there it is. Okay, perfect. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. Okay, so moving on to item 7.2, complete streets design and construction standards, pedestrian through zones. And are there any opening comments from administration?
We're just getting reorganized here. We'll just give it a minute.
Yeah, sure.
No opening comments, Councillor Paquette.
Okay, so we can dive right in, but before we do that, we will hear from the speaker on the item. And so that would be Jason Wang. And are we ready with Jason? There we go, just getting settled. Okay, Mr. Wang, I'm sure you're familiar with the process. You have 5 minutes, and your time starts whenever you decide to start speaking.
Okay, does this work? Perfect. So thank you, councillors, for having me speak today here at Urban Planning Committee. My name is Jason Rochen Wong. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a director on the board of Paths for People and the board secretary. I'm excited to be here today because a clear, complete streets approach to city planning is a great way to build a safe and more livable city. First of all, we would like to thank Councillor Knack's request for an update from city administration on pedestrian through zones, which I'll refer to as PTZs for short, which basically use design to make crossings much safer for folks walking or rolling throughout the city. PTZs include infrastructure like raised and continuous crossings, as shown in administration's first attachment. We are huge fans of PTZs and applaud the report's emphasis on safety in priority areas, including proactively upgrading areas where growth is anticipated. Overall, this is an important opportunity to update how we build new communities and update existing infrastructure. There are many strong and exciting points in this report. PTZs make it safer, easier, and more comfortable for people to walk around and roll through their neighborhoods. They're a great example of how to design a path for people by using hard infrastructure, not just signs, to signal to drivers that they must respect the right-of-way of people walking or rolling. Raised crosswalks highlight busy road crossings, increasing pedestrian visibility. They also help to keep water and snow away from people during severe weather events or just in the winter, unlike traditional gutters that gather those barriers to accessibility. Continuous crossings make driving easier too by clarifying right-of-way and increasing sight lines for drivers from all sides. Moving forward, Paths for People strongly urges City Council to think bigger when it comes to PTZs and complete streets. First of all, we would advocate that City Council direct administration to reevaluate roadway designs throughout the city. In this process, city administration should reevaluate how Edmonton's roads are defined. Roads that make up our neighborhoods and commercial corridors, where we want them to be people-focused, we'll call streets, and places where we want to emphasize or make driving easier, like the White Mud or the Anthony Henday, or major thoroughfares like Fort Road. We think these should be designated separately and treated separately as roads. We need to ensure that we invest in transportation close to our communities. Just like we've invested in the Henday or White Mud or other roads for cars, we need to invest locally for people. Many streets that we currently call collectors could be redesignated as local streets, which would simplify driving through the city and reduce shortcutting through neighborhoods. This is a great way to make our communities feel intimate and people-oriented. Additionally, smaller local roads and alleys can be built in the style of continuous crossings throughout the entire street, like the Dutch Woonerf or shared street concept. And this approach would make shared streets actually safe for people. One of the things we hear quite often is that shared streets still make folks feel unsafe. Secondly, we would advocate that Edmonton make PTZs, we implement PTZs for everyone. While the report identifies a range of priority locations for PTZs, we are concerned that they may leave gaps, missing links, and dangerous crossings in our communities. If we want to achieve a goal of making real 15-minute cities in the future, like we have in the city plan, then it's time to start building far more neighborhood and, then it's time to implement these standards throughout the city. Sorry, where's my timer, Chair? Oh, right there, okay. Lastly, we would ask that the City of Edmonton de-Strodify streets. And I want to hold your attention very quickly on this point. It's sort of a technical term, but stroads relate to complete streets and PTZs in the way that our roads right now are a blend of streets and roads. They have many conflict points where drivers turn on and off onto the roads, and it's unclear where folks have right-of-way. Sight lines are often obstructed, and having PTZs throughout these streets would make it much clearer for drivers to see pedestrians and for pedestrians to be able to walk more safely. So to conclude, just want to say again, thank you for raising this point. PTZs are fantastic, and we hope to see more of them around the city.
Great, thank you so much. You were almost right on time. Okay, so we'll move to questions of our speaker if we have any. Just take a quick look. If we don't, it's because it was an excellent presentation. If we do, it's because it was an even more excellent presentation. And I see we've got a question from Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So now when I read this report, I thought it was wonderful. I thought it would make for safer streets, but then I kind of was thinking, does it? Do we have studies that show that it's safer? Because if it's, like it says, pedestrian experience is continuous. You know, when I was raising my kids, we were, you stop, you make eye contact with the driver, make sure they see you before you proceed. So are we creating a culture of you just keep going? Do we have studies that show that it's safer?
Thank you for that question. I think it's an excellent one, and one that I've been wondering as well. Having lived in the Netherlands where bikes always have the right of way, and then followed by pedestrians, strangely, it was never an issue of conflict points. The right of way, having been clarified through design, made it always clear to drivers and pedestrians who had right of way. I'd say this type of approach is also not novel to Alberta. The town of Canmore, working with multiple consultants, including Stantec, have actually adopted this as like in their version of the Complete Streets Guideline. And they've basically set up a couple of their streets as they've been retrofitting them to be built this way. I wish I could show you photos. I didn't prepare a presentation, to show you those slides, but I think it's easier also to see these truthfully and to understand how they would be used in that way. So we'd love to take you for a field trip to Canmore and show you exactly how these clarify to pedestrians how they can cross safely. I would say by the design of these, if they are built correctly, it doesn't necessarily mean that pedestrians aren't going to look at drivers. It actually makes it easier for them to see drivers. Again, I wish I could show you through a diagram. Fortunately, can't, but I think, it's an excellent question.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I've seen, the diagrams we have here are pretty good, and I've been to Europe, so I've seen, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if there were any studies that show that you were aware of, but maybe not. Yeah, although, like I said, I when I read it, I thought, oh, this concept looks great, and, maybe it's, I just wanted to know if we do have studies to prove that it does actually make pedestrians safer. That's something I can ask administration, though, as well. And that's it for me, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Principe. Councillor Salvador.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the really excellent and comprehensive presentation. I appreciate you being here with us today. So just a few questions. But first, de-strodifying. I'm going to add that to my repertoire. I really like that. So I guess that would be my first question. Given our current approach, what is preventing us from taking a more aggressive approach to de-strodifying in your mind?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think there are multiple reasons why we haven't. I think one that maybe is most relevant today on this point is our complete streets guidelines actually aren't as explicit over how design should look throughout the city as they could be. That's one of the reasons why we are advocating for pedestrian through zones, PTZs, to be implemented throughout the city. The guidelines right now don't really have that sort of holistic view of what the entire city could look like, and as a result, it leaves a bit of a gap between the city plan, and even like the energy transition plan, just in terms of how we're encouraging folks to get around the city. So I'd say strengthening the complete streets guideline standard, whatever the long document is called, that is a great place to start, and it's a document that's already existed for many years. It has a lot of great content in it, but there are also other elements that we think are important that could be in there, such as safer intersection design, like the City of Ottawa has recently implemented, and then we can avoid, a lot of disgruntled citizens like we've had over I think it's 101 Avenue or I can't remember exactly which avenue it is on the east side. But yeah, just in having as the standard, the go-to every single intersection should be safe. On the overall de-strodifying point, I think a lot of that conversation, I'm in engineering training, so I think a lot in engineering terms. I think standards are a great way, but I think also just understanding what they are, seeing them in person or recognizing what a strode is. I think anecdotally, everybody who sees this, who sees that, like I live on 124th Street and 102 Avenue, one of the most major, I think, downtown roads, and there are alleys and gas stations that are right at the intersection of that two-lane right-hand turn, and there's constant honking because drivers continue to reach conflicts with each other because of these things, right? They're turning on and off. People are cutting through the yellow line to get into the gas station where they maybe shouldn't. Clarifying these sorts of things, I think, are extremely important, and once you see it, it's hard to unsee. So I don't know exactly what mechanism beyond standards or like including guidelines like complete streets, main streets guidelines. I think those are all tools, and I think the most important thing is just to look at this comprehensively.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, and it's interesting. You kind of you pointed out something that's important to me too. Is the language around guidelines versus standards, and sometimes when we're talking about guidelines, it's more suggestions. And I'll ask some questions of administration about this, but when I look at the Complete Streets design and construction standards, there does seem to be a higher degree of flexibility in.
Yeah, Councillor, speaking of guidelines, I'm sorry, I do have to interrupt you.
No problem. My timer was not working the whole time. Apologies.
Oh, actually, you know what? The timer's not working. And my apologies. I've got a secondary timer that's showing me you still had another 50 seconds. So please go ahead with your question.
And that's an excellent chair. You have your own timer. So yeah, I was just talking about the degree of flexibility that's built into the current Complete Streets design and construction standards. And I guess, am I hearing that if those were more explicit, that would be helpful around, what is the standard? Where's that bar for what we want to see?
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, and then one other question. You did mention accessibility when it comes to PTZs. So are you referring to kind of all-weather accessibility? I'm thinking of some of the freeze-thaw and some of the drainage concerns that we'd often see at intersections. You're saying PTZs would very clearly help with that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll yield the rest of my time because I can't see it, and I feel like that was 50 seconds. Thank you.
Thanks.
We gave you a few extra seconds for my interruption. We will now move to Councillor Tang.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Jason, for that presentation. I wouldn't mind if Path for People submitted something in writing as well, just because I feel like there's a lot of terminology I was trying to take notes on. Actually, I want to pick up on that accessibility question. And I think when I was reading through and was looking through the picture, I was curious if you and Path for People have any particular position on things like tactile paving. It is in one of those pictures, but it's not necessarily sort of the common standard that we use, and it's actually fairly. It's not a common thing that I see. Wondering if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, tactile paving is a great way to, again, illustrate to both pedestrians or folks rolling and drivers different right-of-way. I can confidently say, there are studies that show how differences in design draw people's attention to two things, right? And we've implemented this, I believe, on the Valley Line LRT guidelines, and also on I think our guidelines for every LRT transit station as well. So I think the report also highlighted that having things like that also don't necessarily conflict with snow clearing in the winter. So I would say maybe the main thing we would want to highlight is the use of color is also really important, not just the use of different texture. Color and texture both have been used in many cities around the world to really emphasize that difference to drivers, to pedestrians. Yeah, in short, design is really important because it helps people understand intuitively what they should or shouldn't do, or what to look for, or what they don't need to think about. Yeah, definitely encourage the mechanism.
Yeah, and I think often these pavings do have a different color from the concrete, and I find them fairly common in a lot of the cities and countries I've been to, and I think we're starting to see more of that, but not so connected. But I just want to flag that for administration. I have more questions about that. And the other question I have for you was, in the report, there's quite a bit of discussion around new developments in greenfield. I'm wondering if if you have any specific recommendations for those kinds of neighborhoods.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually grew up, or I currently live in the west end of Oliver, as I described, but I actually grew up in South Edmonton, right beside what's hopefully going to become the new Heritage Valley like town center node, is identified in our city plan. Back in the day, that was greenfield. Maybe today, less so. The actual town center, I would say, still is very greenfield. But having grown up there and seeing neighborhoods around there and elsewhere across Edmonton too, I think complete streets are totally important in those neighborhoods as well. When we talk about city, when we talk about city building, it's not just about the core. It's really about the entire city. Some of the new neighborhoods down near 41st Avenue, for example, seem to have taken De-Strodifying to a new extreme. I took my parents biking for the first time in many years there just a couple of weeks ago, and they were quite stressed because of all the conflict points, because of how wide the roads were. Like excessively wide, I'd say like 5 or 6 lanes on local collectors, excuse me. So sorry, to get back to the point, I think, as we think about future greenfields, building out those nodes like Heritage Valley Town Center, we really do need to think about these best practices that we are seeing in other cities across the world, in cities like, or towns like Canmore, and as we are seeing more increasingly in the core. I think it's important for the city to really work with developers here and say, you don't get a pass just because you're far out and you have a lot of space. These communities really need to be people-focused. People obviously need to drive to get to them or between those areas and wherever they're going, as we are still working towards building a 15-minute city or 15-minute cities or regions. Yeah, I think it's critically important in those newer areas we hold developers to the same standard as we do in the core. And I'll just give one last example here. The city of Calgary is doing this with a developer in the southwest corner of the city. They're building a new pedestrian-oriented city. So far, it looks great. I'd love for Edmonton to do the same for greenfields.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you very much. I just was a little taken aback when you said it was unclear where folks have the right-of-way. I thought pedestrians always have the right-of-way. No?
I think so too, but I think often drivers don't respect that.
Okay. And like Councillor Principe, yeah, my kids were taught point, pause, and proceed. I don't know if that's still a thing, right? But I'm just looking at, in admin's attachment here, figure 3, the example of a continuous crossing. So does that mean if it is a continuous crossing, the cyclist always just can go without point, pausing, and proceeding, or?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, Councillor. I would say I was a school patroller. I was a school patrol captain when I was young. Definitely know those points. But I would say one of the reasons we have the whole Vision Zero initiative, and I think why we still continue to have major accidents, unfortunately, or major incidents where folks are being hit by vehicles is because our current approaches or previous approaches don't work. Even when pedestrians point, pause, and proceed, often drivers don't see them, or they're distracted on their phones or whatever else. I myself even recently was driving and trying to be cautious, but exiting a parkade, and I came too close to somebody for my own comfort, just because the way it was designed, I could barely see them, right? So I think the status quo isn't enough. Vision Zero, we have to be serious about it, and these are a great way to achieve that. There are also other examples, like in crossing major roads. I don't want to get too much into this, but in Edmonton, when folks have to cross places like Fort Road, they have to cross multiple lanes, like 8 lanes sometimes, right? in one go. This is also bad for drivers because they have to wait 45 seconds or whatever to wait for these folks to cross. There are other ways to do that too, and we hope that we can submit more of that information if we do proceed with something more holistic for the city, looking at road design throughout the city. But to answer your last point about folks going over continuous crossings aren't meant to be like a high-speed zone. There are a point of conflict, but I think, as I've tried to articulate respectfully, the design of it clarifies to folks and makes it easier for folks to see each other. So it's easier for cyclists to see the drivers, make eye contact, and easier for them to understand if they are seen, and if it's safe for them to proceed or not.
Yeah, so the example, like I said, in figure 3, I mean, and it's quite an open, you can see. I also noticed that there is a stop sign put up on the local road too, so I guess, but I just didn't want, I guess, cyclists or pedestrians just thinking that they can just plow through without even paying attention. Okay?
For sure.
And I do like the idea of the raised crosswalks as well, not only, again, for those sight lines, but like I think you'd mentioned the accessibility for people getting across. I think it's also a traffic calming measure as well. So,
can I add one thing to that?
Mm-hmm.
So one other reason, I didn't articulate this in the original presentation, but one other reason why designing infrastructure is so important is like the rules that we have, like I said, aren't entirely effective, and traffic engineers also study things like how well do people understand signs, right? Like the stop sign, which you raised, I think one would think is ubiquitous. Everybody understands what you're supposed to do with the stop sign, but the literature around it is actually not like 100% understanding what a stop sign is. I think most of that's around where you're supposed to stop. Like I think people understand stop means stop, but where you stop is a major factor in road safety. Continuous crosswalks, for example, when built well, like in many parts of Canmore, they have, how to explain this? They separate very clearly where drivers should stop, so that they don't stop, for example, on like the crosswalk, or stop in a way where maybe they look to the right and there are no folks coming. They look to the left, no cars are coming, and then they move out, but then suddenly there's a person, right? Like continuous crosswalks clarify those sorts of things. But relatedly, right? Signs like slow down or like cautionary signs, these are all signs that unfortunately aren't entirely clear. Even though everyone goes through road safety exams to get a license, traffic engineers, when they think about road design, historically have sort of just accepted that not everyone will understand these signs. But I think, yeah, if we're really thinking about that Vision Zero, safe, livable streets, using infrastructure and design to complement those gaps is a great way to make our streets safer.
Thank you. My time is way past.
Just by a tad. Well, thank you very much for that. It looks like we don't have any other questions for you, Mr. Wang. So thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for mentioning Fort Road. It has a bit of an identity crisis, I think. But we will now move. Oh, by the way, Mr. Wang, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the conversation as well. So thank you. We'll now move to questions of administration. I don't see any names on the board, but I know Councillor Salvador, you selected this, so I'm going to guess that you might have a question or two.
I do. Thank you, Councillor Paquette. So I have a number of lines of questioning. I'll just start with, our speaker brought up how can we think bigger about pedestrian through zones. It's one of those things, we know they're good, we know they work, and I guess why don't we do them in areas beyond just what we deem as sort of the priority areas when we're working with a developer, for example?
So we actually do, keeping in mind that the Complete Streets Guideline was updated in 2018 and incorporated this. Since that time frame, I believe the number is 70 raised crosswalks, pedestrian through zones that have been installed. So when you consider that time frame, design, construction, that's moving in the right direction. If your question is around new neighborhood builds, I would ask some of our folks with UPE to support in answering that question.
Sure, I can provide some input. In terms of the new neighborhoods, we can confidently go as far as even back in 2015-16, the neighborhoods that were approved. They do provide a number of policy direction, a holistic network that not only integrates within the neighborhood, but also provides better connectivity outside with the focus on pedestrian, biking, and also identifying some of the priority areas, priority locations, whether we are next to some sensitive land uses like schools or higher density areas. So some of the examples I can give is Dakota North, Glenriding Ravine, Marquee neighborhood. Those active modes direction as part of the policy is embedded within the plan.
Okay, and I guess I'm wondering, really trying to take that farther, what would it look like to have continuous crossings at every intersection between arterials or collectors and local roads, sort of where those two meet? From a policy perspective, what would it take to get to something like that?
At this time, the essence of the Complete Street Guidelines is really to be a context-sensitive design, and so having that kind of one-size-fits-all or blanket approach is quite difficult given the amount of configurations and different contexts that we have, and especially when we're looking in retrofitting situations and renewal. And so it is something that we're always looking at, and so we are in the midst of an update to better integrate some of those considerations in the designs. The designs are regularly updated to take into account the learnings and of the industry and in general. So those are things that we do. Having that blanket approach is something that would be very challenging.
Right. Okay, and I guess what I'm trying to understand is absolutely recognize there's a need for context-specific conversations, and that in certain situations a blanket approach doesn't work. But at the same time, we know we want certain things. So within our current Complete Streets Design and Construction standards, how do we find that sweet spot where we're still raising that bar while still allowing for some context-specific conversations to happen? And I look at like our general standards, for example, that talk about pedestrian and cyclist accessibility, curbs and ramps, bus stop requirements. Those are pretty set in stone. Like there's some fairly rigid requirements, but then when we look at the crosswalk enhancement measures, for example, there's a lot of flexibility there, and it talks about design elements that could or that can be incorporated, but things like even like economic considerations start to enter into those conversations. Like what happens if it is more cost effective to do a regular, standard crossing versus a raised crossing? Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Yes, Councillor, and I think it's quite challenging to talk about hypothetical situations. When we look at the designs and we look at the opportunities that's in front of us, is it a reconstruction? Are we doing a renewal that doesn't involve moving drainage infrastructure. Like we are, there are a lot of layers that need to be taken into account when we look at the designs, and absolutely pushing the integration of those pedestrians through zones and bike lanes and things like that are always looking at back to the city plan. What are the priorities, and ensuring that we're meeting those standards and that we're allocating those resources to the right priorities is also something that's on our in our consideration of the work.
Great, I'm out of time. Thank you. I'll come back.
Thank you. Councillor Principe, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, do these paths, are there studies to show that it is safer? Because as I had mentioned, pedestrian experience is continuous. So do we have studies showing that it is a safer option?
Thanks, Councillor. I'll ask Matthew Ivany to see if he has information about that.
Hi. When we looked and did a bit of research, definitely in the Dutch and the Netherlands context, there is a lot of work that does show it does improve pedestrian safety. But it's definitely a different context than it is in the city of Edmonton. They have, I would say, the way they implement it is in a lot more strategic kind of approach, and looking at areas of like high pedestrian use is where you get the most benefit.
So not really, we don't have studies from Edmonton though that show.
Councillor Principe, we do. We have our Vision Zero report, and our Vision Zero approach really is recognizing that streets are for everybody to use. So it looks at all the modes. And since the implementation of our safe mobility strategy, we have seen a 32% traffic-related fatalities have decreased by 50% since 2015. Serious injuries have decreased by 32%, and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries have decreased by 27%. And that's in our 2021 Vision Zero annual report.
Well done. And I also actually have the question, who does have the right of way? Is it the pedestrian? Because I remember, this was a couple of years ago, I was in the crosswalk. There were no vehicles except for a bike coming, and I was walking, and the person rang their bell to make me stop, and I had to go back. And I was wondering, oh, I thought pedestrians had the right of way, and then the cyclists thought they had the right of way.
Ms. Lamar, is that something that you can speak to?
Of course. I'll ask Ms. Ibrahim to respond, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So at crossings, typically the right-of-way is for the pedestrian, and whether that is marked or unmarked, they do have the right-of-way there, and people driving need to watch out and make sure that they yield or stop to give them space to cross. And I think you're also asking about cyclists crossing, or?
Yes, it was the cyclists rang their bell and made to tell me to stop, and so I had to walk back so that they could go through.
Yeah, so people walking and biking do have the right of way to kind of cross. Obviously, each intersection is separate. When you have the elephant's feet, they're allowed to kind of ride across on their bikes, but typically people crossing, walking and biking and scooters have the right of way at a crossing, even if it's not marked, unless of course there's some signage signaling that they don't. But, yeah.
Sorry, I think I didn't explain myself. I was crossing the crosswalk at a marked crosswalk, and the cyclist was going down a bike lane and rang their bell to make me stop and go back so that the cyclist could go through.
I see. No, so the priority would be for the people crossing at the crosswalk.
Oh, okay.
You had priority, Councillor Principe, and that's as defined in the Traffic Safety Act, which is a provincial act, and it defines that pedestrians have the right of way in a crosswalk.
Okay, yeah, and it was just really, again, just for my personal, knowledge, I wanted to know that. And then also a question I have is, I did read, that it may be, the enhancements may be paid by the developers if identified during the neighborhood structure planning phase. How often, because often when we put these enhancements in, do we not wait until we see a certain level of traffic or a certain need for it, or are we kind of pre-planning it now?
Those areas are being pre-planned now. So now, as Mr. Saeed mentioned, that in some of these neighborhood structure plans, there are mentions of, where the specific pedestrian corridors are, where the enhanced crosswalks and the enhanced sort of pedestrian facilities can be. And that sort of knowledge gets transferred on to the subdivision and ultimately to the construction of the neighborhood. So they are being thought about right now with, current NSPs and ASPs and subdivisions that are coming through the city right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Principe. I hope that the cyclists didn't lose their brakes and they were just careening down out of control. Councillor Knack, please go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. Thanks so much for all the work on this. And so I think the only question I still have left, just to go off a little bit of what Councillor Salvador had raised, is how do we make sure that these changes and these improvements are treated as standard unless proven otherwise, unless there is something that absolutely can't allow us to do it? This is standard. And to me, I don't know if that's the case yet. And I think about, I'll give just a few quick examples. I think about the 124th Street reconstruction underway. I don't believe they have raised crosswalks along that, what is now going to be a main street. I think about 51st Ave, having happened to bike to the south side over the last couple of months, and we just built a new sidewalk, but there was no multi-use trail and nothing was raised. And so there's potentially technical reasons that prevented that. But I feel like it's not necessarily those are standard first unless proven otherwise. It's a little bit of the reverse right now. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think Complete Streets guidelines are a subset of the Complete Streets policy that Council has identified. So if there's a desire from Council to provide direction that it's a standard subject to challenges with technical requirements, I think some direction from Council in that regard would be helpful. In saying that, I think that does require engagement.
Of course, yeah, you'd have to talk with UDI, you'd have to talk with Accessibility Advisory Committee, you'd have to talk with partners to...
That's correct, and I think there are two streams, and Ms. Lattiser touched on this, that new neighborhoods, there's the potential for some more flexibility in terms of how you could do that. When you get into, Ms. Lattiser said, reconstruction, there are many considerations that go into how do you accommodate, and in some of our offline conversations, curb line walks become very challenging to try and accommodate this type of treatment on the basis of just the grades, the physical grades that are required to accommodate.
Yeah, and there's potentially a budgetary, which is part of the intent of the motion. And I'm very comfortable to have that conversation. I mean, I go back to the point that I still would love boulevards on every single street, and if it means finding the budgets so that you have the ability to do that everywhere, unless there's something truly preventing us, I'd like to move closer to that direction. That's sort of where my head's at. But I know you need resources to do that.
Totally. We've gone through many tight corridors with some of our projects where the only option to do that is purchase.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about purchase to accommodate, it becomes significant. So then it's weighing the tools that are in the toolbox to achieve both the renewal of the infrastructure in these cases and the treatments that are required to ensure that we're striving to meet the guidelines that we have in Complete Streets.
And Councillor Knack, I would just add to that whenever you bring in things that are standard, you also need to understand the trade-off associated with innovation. Yeah. And especially in many of our greenfield neighborhoods, we have some really award-winning greenfield neighborhoods. And the reason for that is, and probably the one that was cited here is the Calgary example, is that there's a level of flexibility in looking at that. So if Council had a desire to look at what was standard, I think it would also be really important for you to understand that we still have that level of flexibility to bring in innovative designs that are testing new things that create that type of really great environment and community environment in Edmonton.
Makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, I think that's a requirement of it. I get, yeah, that was just really where I'm trying to get at with this. And again, I appreciate that there's different pieces. It just, since I know I've talked about it forever, and I'm sure you're all sick of hearing me talk about boulevards and other things like that. So I think those are probably all of my questions. Sorry, no, one last piece, but recognizing these were originally designed in 2018 and our accessibility policy didn't come into effect until 2019, we haven't necessarily run these through that updated policy, correct? I think there's probably been some updates, but I don't know in a substantive way at this stage.
So, yeah. Oh, go ahead,
sure,
Natalie.
I can jump in on that. We're actually in the process of doing an update to the Complete Streets Design and Construction Standards at this point in time. And part of that update does include continuous sidewalks and ensuring that there's a little bit more emphasis on how they're used and the type of application. So it's a process that's underway. We're looking towards the end of the year to have that in place. Complete Streets is not meant to be a fixed standard. It does evolve with time as we use and test these different types of tools. And so it's a bit of a continuous improvement sort of exercise that you'll see evolve over time. And as we start to use these things more, which we are using throughout the city in both greenfield and retrofit situations, our standards will evolve with them.
Wonderful. I'm out of time. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor Knack. Councillor Rutherford.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I want to pick up on some of the same line of questioning as Councillor Knack and also Councillor Principe, because I know that, for example, in my ward, Inglewood went through renewal recently, and there was a raised crosswalk at the intersection at 122nd Street near the now what's called the Rocket Ship Park. And I'm sure many of you are also aware that we're still getting a ton of complaints about speeding in that area. And so I guess, you know, what my question is, we talk about Vision Zero, but how, like, have we really studied if there's going to be a cost impact of making this a standard, which I actually fully support? Do we have any real life examples of how this is working? Because what I'm seeing is it's not working to actually traffic calm, for sure.
Well, Councillor Rutherford, I would say first off, in our experiences in the neighborhood renewal program, where we're trying to incorporate some of these new standards or approaches, change is hard, and communities typically have a different reaction. So I'll just say our BGN folks have experienced significant pushback in areas around trying to incorporate some of these ideas. So that's another consideration in implementation, is that community feedback sometimes is non-support. And our folks experience that directly. In terms of the mechanism, in terms of traffic calming, like Ms. Lazurko said, this is a constantly evolving practice in terms of treatments. So the raised crosswalks do help, but other treatments like curb extensions and narrowing of roadways are other mechanisms that we use, but we're constantly trying to find the right approach. And I think if Ms. Lamar wanted to add from a traffic safety perspective, I welcome to her at this point.
Really, it's in line with what you've just shared. So there are a number of tools in the toolbox, all of which can help to slow vehicles, increase visibility of vulnerable road users like pedestrians, and make our streets safer for everyone. So this is one of those tools. And as Ms. McCabe mentioned earlier, since this became a larger priority, not only through how we do redevelopment, redesign through our BGN programs, but also through specific location-focused work through Vision
Mhm.
Zero in city operations, we've seen significant safety improvements on our roads.
The challenge, though, is, and I think this is where I'm kind of leaning to the same sentiments as Councillor Knack of like, it's good that we have this flexibility and adaptability, but are we hitting that bar? And I even asked the question about the public engagement, because if this was said in policy, then it doesn't become a public engagement debate as much as it is right now as a guideline. So that's something that we need to consider as well. But my concern is that when we go through neighborhood renewal, and if this isn't built in at that time, the opportunity for hard infrastructure to do those things is now how many years down the road? 50? Right? So it's like it's a very missed opportunity is my concern. I'm thinking about Calder, I'm thinking about Dunluce, Inglewood's, clearly still got traffic issues. I think Councillor Knack brought up 124th Street as well, which is in Inglewood as well. These are now going to be missed opportunities if we're not doing this work now. So how do we strike that balance with that tension, right? Where and maybe we are, but I think what I'm hearing from my other council colleagues is maybe we're not. And so maybe there's a perception difference between administration and council here.
Oh, I think we're working very hard to implement these, but back to my earlier comment, when you go in and do the significant engagement that we do related to the change in infrastructure within community, it becomes very...
Well, which is why my question to you, Adam, is it better to have this enshrined in policy? Because when it's policy, it's not, it is a factor that, so for example, like people could have, there's certain codes, like building codes. It doesn't matter what people say, they're codes, right? So at some point, I guess my question is by having the flexibility, are we then not enshrining this and making it more challenging and more up for debate than it should be?
Yeah, I think administration's commitment is to implement the Complete Streets guidelines and the improvements that have been identified through Vision Zero and traffic safety. I think if council wants to turn the lever even further to ensure that we're starting at that point, it goes back to what I mentioned to Councillor Knack, that getting us to evaluate that and if there's explicit instructions provided by council related to that, then it becomes even much more of an imperative. Again, I would caution that that may come with technical challenges, cost, and despite through the Building Great Neighborhood program having policy that's clearly identified, there are many instances where we still have significant community opposition or concern related to the improvements that we're making. And so those are all considerations.
I'm out of time. Thank you so much. Great points. Appreciate your answers.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thanks. Just wanted to start by acknowledging, a lot of the incredibly great work that's been happening in this space. I think, knowing that there's 70 raised crossings already. I was just driving by Jasper and 120th Street last night, just some small interventions on the south side, really changing the feel of that crossing and intersection. So yeah, I'm really excited by a lot of what I'm seeing. And building on comments from my colleagues, just really want to absolutely turn that lever even further. Just wondering, I think it's really, just a question of how do we raise that bar? How do we make it the standard? I think too, just sort of even, it seems like in assessments, when we are trading off a number of different factors, again, the weight always seems to be more away from some of the interventions I think that we're wanting to see, or some of the prioritization of active modes that we're wanting to see. So just wondering if sort of a review, when you say you want sort of that clear direction from council, what does that look like? Is that direction to change the Complete Street guidelines? Is that a council policy? What form does that take?
I'll start and Ms. McCabe may jump in. I think it's Well, first off, I think if we needed that, I think it would come with some form of engagement that has to happen with stakeholders, and I'll use stakeholders as a broad description. And it would need to come with sort of echoing some of the comments that there's a more explicit prioritization of pedestrian through zones or raised crosswalks, maybe not being that specific, but active transportation improvements as it relates to new neighborhood builds and rehabilitation. And that would allow us to go back and engage with industry, engage with stakeholders, and sort of bring back a report to committee that would identify this is the method that if council would like this as start here, that we would consider. And Ms. McCabe, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Just a few additions, Adam. It probably wouldn't be a policy update, Councillor. It most likely would be, and I don't think it even would be an update of the design and construction standards. I think it's more about understanding what needs to be, I think explicit's the right word. What needs to be explicit? What are the things we're not negotiating on as a city in the design and construction standards? And what are the things that we are still open to a level of flexibility in order to create innovation in our neighborhoods? And as part of any report back, I think, as Adam's highlighted, engagement with stakeholders will be really important. I think also council should understand the cost implications at a very high level associated with making changes.
Great. Yeah, I think the cost differential is an important piece to understand. And yes, absolutely. I think it is about that, not necessarily the exact intervention, but the prioritization of the active modes that needs to be really explicit. So look forward to, I think, some potential motions coming forward from my colleagues around that. Just wanted to sort of just another technical benefit. I'm not sure that it was raised. I'm just wondering the opportunities with some of the pedestrian throughways in terms of winter accessibility and what the implications are for snow clearing of streets when there are those raised facilities. Does that become part of like a sidewalk clearing process? Yeah, just wondering if anyone could speak to that, because I think that's another important benefit for us to highlight here.
Councillor Stevenson and Scored Subrick, there are some different applications of equipment that we use depending on the specific type of facility we're clearing. So we do have, specific teams that do address our locations that are intended for the mobility network. And sometimes we do have to use some specific locations, but that we try and build that into the programming so that we know where we are with our active modes equipment. So it does require a bit of planning from an operational perspective, but certainly it's not insurmountable and something we can build into our process.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, because I think that even if sidewalks can be perfectly clear, the intersections themselves can be very difficult for folks with reduced mobility to navigate. So that's wonderful to hear that could be wrapped in there. Yeah, I think I am out of time. So thanks very much. Thanks for the report and the answers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Wright, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I guess maybe my first question is to Ms. Lamar. Would these flexible design standards, would that improve your goals for Vision Zero? And if they were put in place like during development, would that also reduce strains on your budget?
I think the flexibility allows us to choose the right application and tool for the right location, given what's going on, what kind of usage we want to encourage for that space, safety history, etc. So absolutely, having that flexibility is very important. And of course, when it comes to the very specific budget around the safe mobility strategy, when these measures are implemented through development or through the programs in integrated infrastructure services, that does alleviate the sort of future pressures on more location-based pieces through the Safe Crossings program, for example.
And if it's incorporated in with like neighborhood renewal as well, that doesn't come out of your budget either?
No, there's lots of collaboration between the two groups, of course, but no, that would come more from that work.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess sort of going off of the neighborhood renewal, And maybe to Councillor Stevenson's point, I do have some neighborhoods in the ward coming up, I think in 2023 for renewal. And one of the concerns that they've expressed is that the road has been built up so much now that it is level with the sidewalks. And so when we get the freeze thaw in the wintertime and it's not being cleared, I guess how would we address that? And I think that's what Councillor Stevenson was asking.
So in terms of neighborhood reconstruction, that's our opportunity to actually adjust roadway elevation with new road and sidewalk construction. The life cycle of neighborhood renewal is that over the years, there's treatments at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years related to the road infrastructure. And so asphalt is overlaid until the point that it gets to, when we go in and do neighborhood reconstruction, that's almost our opportunity to reset the roadway elevation in relation to the sidewalk elevation. And then it does provide the opportunity to look at raised crosswalks, pedestrian through zones, curb extensions, etc.
Yeah, because I'm just, again, looking at figure 3 in the attachment where it is all level, and I can see that being good, except if it's along Jasper Avenue or something which gets cleared regularly, that might be okay, but in a suburban neighborhood that doesn't necessarily get the full attention of snow clearing right off the bat, it could be hazardous for those trying to traverse it.
Yeah, I think that if I'm understanding the example, the difference here is that the roadway elevation is set up in a way where that actual elevation gap between the boulevard, sidewalk, bikeway and the roadway is enough that normal drainage patterns will follow that, versus where if the road is higher, there's less capacity to accommodate that drainage.
Well, that local road also looks to be level to the continuous walkway there. So again, I guess.
Well, and without getting into the specifics,
yeah.
The local road probably drains backwards and into a different drainage pattern. So this is part of the challenge when we go in to do neighborhood renewal, is that the footprint adjacent to the transportation right-of-ways are basically set. And so we have limitations on how high, how low, how things are going to cross drain, back drain, and fit in this new infrastructure, because it's essentially brand new infrastructure that we build when we go in and do neighborhood reconstruction. So it becomes quite challenging to accommodate all those different requirements.
And make it work with what's already there that you're not going to be
exactly
changing. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm just also wondering about cost-wise. How much extra is it for asphalt for a speed table versus, and I'm thinking sort of for accessibility, versus the sidewalk where you do the ramps down? Like which is more expensive?
So, of course, it's very dependent on the situation, but at a high level, a raised crossing could be upwards of $40,000 to $50,000 in addition to like what we would consider, let's say, base typical road design.
Okay.
And then a continuous sidewalk is something that has a little bit more cost related to articulating that in the context of a road and some of the retrofits. And so we're talking about maybe $80,000 to $100,000 for a raised crosswalk. Sorry, for a continuous crossing.
Okay, but if it was like if you were going into a neighborhood and the sidewalk ramps where they dip down, is that how much is that to retrofit that? I'm just compared to the raised crosswalk, just making it more wheelchair accessible to go across the road.
So I think in this context, you're looking to add, let's say, a curb cut.
Yeah. Okay, that's what it's called. Thank you.
Okay. That's a fairly minor intervention, and it's something that we regularly do through programs to add those specific locations that respond to needs from the community.
Okay, so that's cheaper than a.
It is. Yes.
Okay, speed table. Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Tay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the great questions from my colleagues, and most of mine have been answered. I have two threads of thoughts related to that standard piece, in particular in greenfield developments. And I mean, which, you know, I understand there's some motions in the work, and hopefully will be addressed in that. You know, and I take administration's point about, you know, there are a lot of these success stories that's really because of that flexibility. I guess, I mean, I think the goal here is that how do we make it so that they're not one-off success stories, and how do we raise the expectation of what Edmontonians can experience in their day-to-day. Yeah, and I think you've talked at length about that. The other piece that I've been kind of that's percolating for me, and I don't mean to be hyper specific, but just want to come back to what I asked earlier around the tactile paving. Instruments like that, I feel like it's fairly simple. I wasn't sure what is currently outlined in the accessibility policy related to that. I see it sometimes somewhere, but not always. Recently, when we were visiting the Millwoods Town Center station with the accessibility committee, you know, it's very clear that those paving actually just ends at the sidewalk. So if you are having visual impairment, and if you're someone with visual impairment, it just kind of ends, and not really sure where it goes. And you know, I've had this is an active conversation I'm having with administration, with community, and with industry. And one piece I understand when it comes to some of these measures is cost. But you know, there's a way to also maybe add an intersection. You know, in the pictures that you shared, it's not a common thing at some of the intersections. So I guess I'm just wondering about that element. If you have any comments and feedback, does the city already provide that kind of guideline? Is it a recommendation we generally have, but not always follow through? How do we make sure we really, you know, up our infrastructure?
Councillor Tang, wanted to point out, so there are two guidelines right now that we would combine when we talk about the situations that I think you're describing. There's the complete streets, and there is the access design guideline that are related to the accessibility policy that speak to a lot of the interactions maybe between different assets. And but for specifics, I'll just turn it over to Mr. Ivany and see if he can comment on the use of tactile paving.
Hi, sure. I just want to clarify. Are you talking about like the markings at a curb ramp, or I know
No.
or go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes they are at curb ramps, sometimes they're along sidewalks. You know, there are strips that are yellow and sometimes orange, different color from the rest of the sidewalk. There are raised bumps for people who are using a cane or who are using visual devices to navigate. You know, in a lot of places they're well connected. They're pretty prevalent because you know, people walk everywhere, and I'm just noticing as I've, you know, been on accessibility committee for not too long, but I've started to pay more attention to some of these factors and notice that it's not necessarily a consistent trend.
Sure. Yeah. So the LRT, definitely do like I think they're plastic truncated yellow painted domes along the edge of the train crossing, and that's kind of what they decided. And they've been retrofitting the stations kind of to meet that. And then we've been doing cast iron truncated domes. They're kind of, I guess they look like cast iron, kind of a reddish brown. At especially on the streetscapes, we put them downtown as much as we can, like Jasper Ave. We did a bunch in the New Vision, and then LRT at all the crossings have the truncated cast iron ones. So downtown we try to put them in, and then the rest of the ones in the city are just the tooled grooving. If you see, they kind of like point pedestrians in the curb ramps, and that's just currently what our practice is. So downtown we try to do truncated as much as possible.
Right. And, you know, I would be curious if that is also in, you know, industry best practice, you know, with other municipalities, and, you know, is there ways that's not just in downtown, because people do walk everywhere. But I appreciate those points. And I just want to say, you know, these are two things that I'm really focused on with this report. And I appreciate the conversation that's been had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Councillor Salvador, I believe you may have a motion locked and loaded.
I do. I am going to to ask one question first, and then if it's okay, I'll put a motion on the floor.
The time is completely yours.
Excellent. So just a quick question about sort of new NSPs versus existing NSPs, and I understand that for new NSPs, we engage with greenfield developers to identify priority areas where additional treatment might be necessary throughout that process, which I think is fantastic and really, really important. But it does leave a question in my mind around many of our existing NSPs that have been around for many years. I guess, what is our ability to review some of those older NSPs? What's that process look like?
I can start, and maybe Mark can help me here. In terms of the NSPs that were, say, for example, done a decade ago, we do take a systems approach because, as I mentioned earlier, that it's not only connectivity integration within the neighborhood, but also to adjacent neighborhoods. So it is all about taking that systems approach, looking at what the policy direction is through other initiatives, whether we are looking at our bike plan, whether we are looking at 1.25 million mass transit network, are we next to a major transit corridor? So those are the trigger points where we see that, yes, there is still a desired line. There are things that may not be explicit in the NSP, but there are opportunities here that we can definitely use and provide a more integrated outcome.
Councillor Salvador, that would be a major body of work that we wouldn't recommend at this time because we've got a really great relationship here in Edmonton with our development community. We work very closely with them when we have new standards that come in, and they evolve some of their plans as a result of those new standards, especially when it allows for more innovation in those new neighborhoods. So it's not something that's currently on our work plan because we've got a number of other bodies of work that we believe will help, that we know will help move city plan forward over the next few years.
For sure. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and recognizing that's obviously a huge body of work, I was more curious about sort of that continual evolution and sort of process of continual improvement. So yeah, I definitely got the clarity I needed there. So I do have a motion that I'm going to put on the floor. Let me just get the most recent wording that the clerk should have. So that administration provide a report to Urban Planning Committee that includes stakeholder engagement and outlines how standards are determined for public realm infrastructure such as crosswalks, shared use paths, bike lanes, boulevards, and sidewalks, propose changes and analysis on what could be updated to be explicit to improve active transportation, safety, accessibility, and operational effectiveness, including standardization of raised crosswalks, intersections, pedestrian through zones, active pathways, boulevards, etc. And due date of Q3 2023, Urban Planning Committee. And I'll just take a minute and a half to introduce that. So yeah, just in general, I think in recent years we've made some really great strides here in Edmonton for improving how our public realm is built and renewed. There's still some progress to be made if we're going to be able to really meet those goals outlined in Vision Zero and to inspire greater mode shift as outlined in the city plan. And I'm thinking about crosswalks and shared use paths, bike lanes, boulevards, sidewalks, how modern our planning and development process is and how our standards are used to inform community design. So really pleased to hear about that commitment to continuous improvement, and I actually think we've demonstrated a lot of leadership in this space. I've certainly been noticing the improvements throughout the neighborhood renewal process in some of the communities that I serve, some of the new raised crossings near school zones. I'm thinking of the ones along Ada Boulevard, even right off 112th. There was a beautiful example that was included in the report, and that's super exciting to see. Based on the discussion that we had today, I do think there's an opportunity here to take a look at how we can be more explicit with our standards related to active mobility, including how standards are determined and what options exist for sort of raising that bar on some of the active transportation and accessibility design considerations that we'd like to see. So happy to discuss if folks have any other comments, but I will leave it at that. Thank you, Councillor Paquette.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. This motion is in order, and it looks like Councillor Knack may have some questions.
No questions, Councillor Paquette, just to speak to it at the appropriate time.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, then I think, we might have it. Councillor Tang, is that for questions or to speak?
Speak.
To speak. Okay. All right. Well, perhaps we'll give Councillor Knack the last word, unless Councillor Salvador wants it. And I'll just check in. Councillor Stevenson, are you to speak or for questions?
Just to speak, thanks.
Just to speak. Okay. Well, we'll go with Councillor Tang then. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Oh, I thought Councillor Knack will go first. Just really appreciate this motion on the table and appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and have that conversation with my colleagues in administration. I'm not a planner. I'm not a technical engineer. I think there's a lot of even terminology that are so new to me since being elected. But I do know, from observation, from talking to residents, how much people appreciate good infrastructure. And, in my ward, largely suburban with a lot of new neighborhoods. Some are award-winning suburban neighborhoods. And if you look at some of these features, I think there are certainly things that are, I think, higher than the standards that are drawing people to some of these places. And to me, I would love to see us, I think, raise the bar and continuously to raise the bar. And I think, anyways, I just want to, I think this motion covers a lot of the topics that I'm interested in, whether it's at the design construction stage or whether it's around issues of accessibility. And I'm looking forward to the engagement. This is something I've been thinking a lot about and talking to industry and to community about. So hopefully we'll have some opportunities in the fall for public conversation about standards in a way that is understandable and accessible to the general public as well. So thank you. Just want to say thank you for putting this forward, and I hope this leads us to some productive conversations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thanks so much. First to the mover and movers in the background as well who helped craft this motion. I'm really, really excited for this work. As has been mentioned, we've made incredible strides in recent years to advance this work. And this motion is really about taking that even further and continuing on this great path that I think we're on, no pun intended. So thanks to city staff for all the work that has happened already. I'm very much looking forward to this work coming forward. Improving continuous improvement to our practices, to our implementation of these policies is what will get us to the future that we hope to see. So thanks again so much to the mover and to the staff who will be undertaking this work.
Great, thank you so much. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Councillor Paquette. So I think back to a couple of years ago, I had asked about the neighborhood renewal budget and if we had enough funding in place to ensure the type of upgrades we've been talking about today would be able to happen on a fairly regular basis. And the answer was yes. And for me, I'll be honest, I was always skeptical when I'd heard that answer, because I think what I had in my mind as the impression of what would be standard versus maybe what I think was standard from the city administration perspective was different. And that disconnects on me, not on city staff, just to be very clear. I probably should have made it a little more clear when we talked about it over the years. And so I really like what we have in terms of this motion to make it far more clear. In my mind, we need to change how we approach neighborhood renewal, collector renewal, arterial renewal, alley renewal. So piggybacking off all of those times. And I appreciate that there will still be a budget piece to it, and I was asking about that earlier, but I think when that analysis comes back, because this motion talks about analysis, we can't just focus on the extra $40,000 for a raised crosswalk. We need to highlight that in the report, but we also need to talk about the cost savings to somebody to think about how many slip and falls we have in the winter. We have to think about how much we've spent over the years, and I can tell you my time on council, we spent a lot of money over the years on crosswalks, on street labs, on traffic safety upgrades, and literally millions upon millions upon millions upon millions trying to respond to concerns that come up in virtually every community that I represent, and I wouldn't be shocked if it's similar to what you deal with. We should think about the impact to our snow and ice control program and how the crews could be far more effective in addressing snow. So what is the cost savings to their time that can then be applied to do a better job? So those are the type of things we need to think about. And I'll give just a few very quick examples. I think about one of the first things I did with on council, I had in West Jasper Place, an intersection 153rd and 98th, a local road, but lots of speeding traffic down 98th Avenue. We had traffic safety staff come out numerous times to do speed monitoring surveys, to do studies, and ultimately the answer we kept getting back was, well, there's not enough traffic volume to justify putting anything in place. Meanwhile, there's still real issues with that limited amount of traffic volume. We finally got to a four-way stop, but that was about a 2-year process. Think about the staff time that I had to use, just me as one councillor, working with Ms. Lamar's team and others on something that if we built in raised intersections to neighborhood renewal budget and did that everywhere, what amount of time would we save, costs would we save, and frankly, lives would we save in the safety element if we made sure this is clear? Even in new neighborhoods, and I appreciate that there's some innovation happening, but I think about a community like Rosenthal, which I represent right now, and they've been under development really only in the last decade. And yet in the last 2 years, they started up a traffic safety committee of about 10 individuals, have been using so much city staff time to put in street labs, to do different signage, to do different things, all because, well, the neighborhood's actually designed like pretty much every other neighborhood. So that goes back to what are we trying to accomplish? What is our sort of overall vision here? And so my expectation, and to be very clear when this comes back, is that this is not a debate as whether we're going to make changes. It is time to be very clear. Let's have the budget conversation. Let's understand the cost savings in other areas. And again, none of this is the fault, just to be very clear, of city staff who have done a wonderful job implementing complete streets. We've made a ton of progress since we've really started to lean into this, but now it's time to make that next leap. I love the conversation we heard earlier today about Stroads. There should be no more Stroad in our city. And it's a North America problem, but it's a terrible roadway design. It doesn't help the people driving, and it doesn't help the people using other modes of transportation. It's actually worse for both types of folks. And so let's make sure our standards are clear and create a new path going forward. And I'm glad we sort of explicitly talked about some of the things we want to see in these proposed changes so that we have that comfort. And I hope the engagement isn't just with UDI. I know we didn't list it out, but it can't just be with UDI. It has to be with Paths for People, it has to be with the Accessibility Advisory Committee, it has to be with the Edmonton Federation of Community Leagues, has to be part of all of these different groups that also care about the livability and have used so much of their time trying to accomplish this. So full support. Thanks. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor Knack. I just feel like that was an underhanded criticism of Fort Road yet again, and I'm here for it. Okay, Councillor Salvador, I think you wanted to close.
Sure, I'll just be very, very brief. Just want to thank Councillor Knack for initially bringing this motion forward and really for being a champion for this work for many years. Really appreciate the collaboration on today's motion, as well as other colleagues who've been helping in the background on this one, and of course administration. Just want to reiterate gratitude as well. I think we ultimately all want to get to a place where we can safely and comfortably walk, bike, roll, and move around our communities in ways that work for us. So looking forward to seeing this report come back so that we can build on the progress that we've made to date. I think this is a really exciting opportunity and a necessary step in order to get us to the vision outlined in City Plan. So I'll end there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Salvador. And just a quick warning for committee members, hold on to your seats because we just have one little order of business to get to after this vote, so stick around. But if there is no other debate on this item, please vote.
We have all the votes.
Please display the vote. And that is carried. Okay, excellent debate. Now, just for your information, normally when we are selecting items, we don't always select all the items. So then when we move forward, we usually vote on items not selected. So that means that item 5.1 kind of got lost in the mix at the beginning of the meeting. So at this point, we're just going to have to do a really quick vote on item 5.1, request to reschedule reports. It's the Edmonton Ski Club replacement. And it's simply because they have one more report to finalize. So if you don't mind, committee members, if we can vote on that, please vote.
Oh, Mr. Chair, we need somebody to move the motion.
Oh, right. Oh, sorry. That would be me. I'm moving that we reschedule.
Thank you.
Item 5.1. Please vote.
We have all the votes.
Display the vote. And that has carried. Thank you. That is everything for today, unless there are any notice of, or any motions without official notice, but I haven't heard of any. So we are adjourned. Well done.